Hello, thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. My name is Jackson Muneza. I'm a media professional working here in Washington, D.C., kind of a jack of all trades, from producing shows to editing to filming, hosting TV and radio programs, and using new media technologies to tell stories and many other tasks that are associated with the profession. Now, if you're a journalist these days, you need to be able to do all that stuff to be able to tell the story effectively. Now, since 2007, I've been producing and hosting Upfront, a radio show that is broadcast around the African continent to an audience of over 35 million people. That is on the Voice of America. Now, in addition to that, for the past 2 years, I've been hosting the Red Carpet Show, which is a television program that focuses on the global arts and sports industry. But that is not the subject of my conversation today. I'm here to talk about a little bit about my life. And today I will focus on some of the wars and conflict that defined and shaped my life and profession, and how my journey took me to places where I had to learn different languages as a survival mechanism. Now, if you were born in the 70s in East Africa, your life expectancy was one of the lowest in the world. But even then, it was not as low as that of a child born in a refugee camp like myself. And if you survived the first 5 years of your life, which is a milestone, you became, or it was expected of you to become an integral part of your community. For example, you were expected to contribute in some ways, shape or form to the household. And that either meant that you had to fetch water or collect firewood for home use or other tasks. And if you survived those risks that are associated with child labor, there were other tasks and other risks abound. And today, I want to focus on one singular aspect of my life that has repeated itself over the years. You see, if you lived as long as I have with my kind of background, you have witnessed or been part of numerous life-changing events that have either affected you directly or indirectly. And for me, those events were the wars and conflicts that constituted a better part of my childhood and still up to my adulthood. If you were born in Uganda at the end of the 70s, you witnessed or survived, which was the big 1979 war between Uganda's Idi Amin. I'm sure many of you have heard of Idi Amin versus his other East African neighbor. Idi Amin was the president of Uganda. He was fighting his East African neighbor, Tanzania, at the time under the president, Julius Nyerere. And I'm sure many of you have heard both of them. And Idi Amin's brutal regime has been very well documented in the media, including in pop culture too. Now that war, that 79 war was brutal. It was violent, like wars, everywhere. Thousands of people were killed in that war. Thousands of others were displaced from their homes to create what they call internally displaced people, who are different category from refugees, which I was. Now, my earliest memories as a child were of my mother carrying me in the dark of the night on her back. And believe me or not, I don't think I've told this story to many people before. So, I guess I'm making kind of an official debut of that story. and the longer part of it will be in a book someday. But my earliest memory of my mother carrying me in the dark of the night on her back. I was about 3 or 4. My mother was carrying with her, with other 7 children, in tow. She would be carrying me on her back, and on her head, she would be carrying all her life belongings. She was running away basically from the war zone to protect her children. This particular war started as our family of 8 was marking our 15th year as a refugee in a refugee camp where I was born. Now, like my father and mother, the majority of young people young men and women who were born around this time, around that time, if you're born in the 30s, 40s, 50s, you ended up as a victim of the numerous conflicts, from independence struggles, like the Mau Mau in Kenya, the war in Rwanda, and then subsequently other civil wars that took place in the 60s and the 70s. And the 60s wars, the reason why my parents ended up being refugees in Uganda, neighboring Uganda, where they had to walk thousands of miles as displaced refugees to move to, as people who were basically displaced from their country to go to another country to seek, shelter and safety. Back to the 1979 war, when the war started, we were in a refugee camp in Western Uganda, which is close to Rwanda. And that area was a theater of operation for both armies. That's the Ugandan army and the Tanzanian army, as they fought to capture territory. Now, this area is known for its hilly terrain. And so each night when the fighting started, in the evenings, my mother would carry me and my siblings through hills and valleys to a place where there was no fighting. And it was because of that war that my mom sent me to live with my sister, who at the time was a high school student in one of the main towns in the country, in Uganda. Now, Uganda, for many of you who probably have heard of it, is a very diverse country. It has over 50 tribes speaking different languages and dialects. And if you lived in any major town, whether it's in Kampala, the capital city, or in Jinja, the second big town, you were part of this melting pot of rural to urban migrants, people who had moved out to the city from the villages for various reasons, especially looking for work in the factories or for the government. The government is usually the biggest employer in Africa. So each neighborhood where we lived was comprised at least of 15 to 20 different tribes. And their daily hustle involved trading with each other, transacting all kinds of businesses with each other. And the people who learned and spoke more languages in these townships or towns or slums or whatever you want to call it, were the ones who were the most successful. So it was not uncommon for someone to speak at least 3 languages fluently. And for me as a refugee, my hill was a little bit steeper. So I was already an underdog in many ways, in every sense of the word. But I found that I could easily relate to other people if I spoke their language. And so by the age of 10, I could easily speak 6 to 7 local languages and to understand many more. That was necessary for my survival, for me to be able to navigate through this society. And now languages can come handy in a conflict. The more you're able to express yourself in another person's language, the more you can relate to them, especially if they can save your life. The other major conflict that I remember was one that brought Uganda's current president, to power over 35 years ago. At that time, I was living in a different town, living with my older brother. Now, the thing about that war is that it changed the dynamics of power in Uganda as it relates to which tribe controlled the army. And at that time, I think I was barely 10 years old, but I remember vividly incidences where I had to use my language skills to get out of some really tough situations. Fast forward 1994, the genocide in Rwanda. Our people, my parents included, returned to their homeland after 30 years as refugees. Now, at that time, I was barely out of high school, but my passion for journalism had already been ignited. I had founded 2 school newspapers from the age of 14. And I remember one of my biggest fights in my school that actually led to my suspension was when I advocated against the law that a new school policy that was banning the speaking of non-English languages on our school campus. So I used my platform, the school newspaper, to resist this new policy. I wrote a couple of editorials about Pan-Africanism. I talked about the virtues of learning your local language and learning other local languages. And the school official behind this policy basically called for my suspension. And I had to leave my boarding school and go home for a week or two. But suffice to say, that policy was reversed a couple of months later because of my resistance to it. At the end of my high school, I moved back to Rwanda. That's after the '94 genocide. And at that point, my mission was to get into broadcasting. And there was only one radio station in the country. I remember walking into this heavily guarded station because radio stations were heavily guarded. If there was a coup d'etat or any type of fighting, radio stations were the one piece of infrastructure that everybody wanted to get their hands on. So I walked into it and into this radio station, past the security guards, and looked for the manager of the radio station and asked for a job as a presenter. And aside from being impressed about the fact that I was able to get past security and get to him and have the confidence to ask him for a job, he asked how many languages I spoke. And at the time, the languages that they needed at the time were English. I had to speak Kinyarwanda, obviously, which is my language. But for a country that was just out of war and that was also a former French colony, English was a currency in shortage. And, in short, that's how I started my broadcasting career. As a young reporter covering wars from the Congo. There were two major wars, which were called like the World Wars of Africa, that took place when I was a young reporter. And my journey brought me here in America. I remember when I was an undergraduate student going to protest the Iraqi war here in Washington, D.C. And so all these wars were basically in many ways shaped me as a person, but it also shaped my career. And I've continued to cover numerous wars and conflicts in various parts of the continent as part of my job, and including the latest major war that is currently taking place in the Horn of Africa in Ethiopia. And there's more to that story, but for now, I want to end here. Maybe, like I said earlier, there'll be a book someday. But I want to thank you for allowing me to share my story. It's just a snippet of my story. And I hope it inspires students of languages and anyone interested in learning about other people's languages and cultures. Language is a perfect entry point that teaches you so many things, including humility. But I think personally, most importantly, it teaches you empathy. So I want to thank you. If you have any questions for me, I'm here for another couple of minutes, but I want to thank you for inviting me to speak to you and, for letting me share my story with you. Okay. Well, thank you, Amanda. Thank you very much. I've been blessed to interact with and mentor some young people, including Hannah. And thank you, Amanda. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mary. Right, and I see a question from Fluency Online asking, how can we learn more for our students to understand the survival role of language? I think honestly, one of I have a 14-year-old and 11-year-old daughter. They're growing up in one of the most diverse countries in the US. That their generation is said to be one of the most diverse, and I encourage them to learn other people's cultures, to be open to take in and again and learn other people's traditions and cultures, especially their languages, because it is essential and very important as one as in this world where we've become essentially one world. There are no borders anymore, no walls, so to say. We're so interconnected in so many ways, and learning a language, an extra language just from your primary language, will be that needed or necessary a tool, I guess, in your arsenal to be able to survive and to compete on the job market. Linda, the question is, how did you learn languages on your own? It was, I guess, there's some people who think that, or who say that some people are able to learn languages faster than others. I don't know how true that is. I feel like if you commit yourself to learning a language, that you're able to do it. Just you have to have the courage. And one of the ways I was able to do it is continuously interacting with these different people, making mistakes, learning from my mistakes, being curious. And curiosity is a big factor here, because I think that it has also helped me in my job and my career, being constantly curious about other people, about their cultures, learning a word here and there, using it, being fearless as you continue on your journey of learning. Yes, Amanda, I say one of the most fascinating things to do is to visit Voice of America and see what an essential. Yes, Voice of America broadcasts in over 45 languages around the world, if not more. On a regular day at my workplace, I interact with people from different parts of the world. But in the Africa service where I work, I speak at least 5 languages a day with different coworkers, just easily, seamlessly. Like, you find them in a hallway, you just start a conversation in Swahili. You find another one in the hallway or their desk, you speak in French. Another one, you're speaking Luganda to them, or my language, or Kirundi, all these different languages that I've learned over the years and I continuously use. I was lucky to work in an organization that uses those languages as a way to reach people and provide information and news around the world. Correct, Amanda. Yes, I do. I do remember you came to visit, Amanda. I took you around. Yes, no, it's a great place. I think the only other place in the Washington D.C. area that is like the Voice of America is the World Bank. But because we use languages to broadcast, we broadcast in these different languages. I think there's a better presence or commitment to languages at my organization than anywhere else. And I would invite anybody who is in the Washington, D.C. area to come and visit us. I will give you a tour. That's if we open again. Currently, we are working from home because of the COVID-19 restrictions. But once the world gets back to normal, you're all invited to come and visit us and learn about some of the programming that we do. Okay, so I see a question here. What is your advice for students with the independent learning skills of a language versus classroom learning? Now, many of my languages I did not learn in a classroom. I think the only two languages I learned English in the classroom, obviously. I was in a French class until I realized that it wasn't really helping as much. So I had to learn that on my own. I was reading mostly books and watching other visual media to learn. And that's how I learned my French, and listening. But if you're able to find a way to learn, to incorporate both learning in a classroom and then practicing and being in a community where they speak the language, or accessing people of these different language skills and speaking to them, I think you have an upper hand than somebody who's primarily learning in class. And the thing about language, it's always evolving, and it's kind of a living object. So you have to nurture it. Like currently, some of the languages that I used to speak about 10, 15 years ago, because I don't practice them anymore, or I don't have a lot of people to speak them with, I feel myself losing that competency. And it comes back when I do find these people and talk to them and kind of practice. But it's at some point figure out how to, or find a way to immerse yourself in the languages and the culture and the people. And that's why I encourage my students to travel as much as you can. I know it's expensive, but whatever you can do to save some money to travel. And it's such a big, beautiful world that we live in. And I think, like I said earlier, language is one of the primary entry points to a different culture. And set some time aside, and if you're interested in one language, whether it's Spanish or French, visit these different places where you can immerse yourself in that culture and the people. I think that would be a very good way to learn the language. Shirley Louise, what is the name of your company? Sorry, I didn't mention that in the beginning. It's called the Voice of America, which is a U.S. federally funded radio, TV station or media organization. It's now called the U.S. Agency for Global Development. It's over 75 years old, and we broadcast news to the rest of the world. And that's why most Americans don't know about us, because we don't broadcast in the U.S. Thank you, Linda. Okay, I think and listen, if you have any other questions, I'll share my email, and you can reach out to me. I'm always willing and able to answer questions, whether it's relating to my work or just to languages in general. And check out my show Upfront. You can go to you can Google Upfront Voice of America. I'll send you a link. Let me see if I can find a link and send it to you guys. Okay. About to put in my just share with you the link to my program. I would love for you to listen to it. Give me some feedback if you can. So our Facebook page has over almost 1 million followers who are always interacting with us. Feel free to share and like and share and comment on some of the stories we're posting on a daily basis. But with that, Okay. Thank you guys for listening.